He'll edit it. Okay, gentlemen. Erev Shabbat Shalom. Leil Shishi. It's holy time to learn about Parashat HaShavua. So like this. A question that I've been addressing in the past couple of years, actually, something that has always bothered me. Of course, Parashat is Toldot, and Toldot talks about the birth of our famous twins, Yaakov and Esav, to Yitzhak and Rivka, and the bulk of the Parashat discusses the relationship between these two brothers, Yaakov and Esav, and of course, as we discussed many times in the past, not only Yaakov and Esav, it's also basically the distinction and the connection and the difference between good and evil, right? Yaakov and Esav. Yaakov represents, Torah, belief in Hashem, Yirat Shamayim, and Esav is the exact opposite. Esav is evil. Esav is a Yetzer Hara, right? We even discussed in one class that actually Esav was the embodiment. He was the physical embodiment of the Yetzer Hara. The guy that only wants to do bad to you. That is who Esav is. So it's not only the relationship between Yaakov and Esav, it's the relationship between good and evil, if you had to call it that. What always bothered me is based on who we know that Esav is. Esav is not a good guy. And you ask anybody in the entire world, you ask the kids in grade school, even my 5-year-olds, they know exactly who Esav is. You say who is good, who is bad. Yaakov is good, and Esav is the evil one. So my question is, in one of the very, very, very first Pesukim of the parasha, it says clearly, "Vayehav Yitzhak et Esav gitzayid befiv," right? That Yitzhak loved Esav because Esav would provide him with game. And my question is that's impossible. It's impossible to tell me that Yitzhak Avinu, very, very holy patriarch of our nation, he loves Esav. Esav is the evil one, and it doesn't make any sense. So you'll tell me something that Rashi says, if you look at the source sheet itself, right after the very first pasuk of Vayehav Yitzhak et Esav, Rashi comes along and says, Yodei et Tzayid, that what does it mean that Esav knew how to trap, because he was a hunter, he knew how to trap, he knew how to bring Yitzhak Avinu game, which is food. He said, Latsud v'laramot et avi befiv. Not only would he trap animals, he also trapped his father. How would he trap his father? He would trick him. He would come along, and Rashi says, "V'sho'alo et Abba." He would ask his father. He says, "Abba, he'ach ma'aserin et hamelach ve'et hatevin." When a person wants to give ma'aser, what's ma'aser? 10%. Ma'aser is 10%. When a person makes money, he has to give 10% over that money to the poor people, or the Kohen, to the Levi, depends what times we're living in. So for argument's sake, a guy makes $100, he has to give $10 of that, 10%, over to the poor people. So that not only applies to money, it also applies to your product. So therefore, if a person made a lot of salt, for an example, he made a lot of tevin, which is wheat, for an example, he has to give a portion of that over to the poor people. So Esav's question, Esav came along, he told his father, he said, Abba, when a person wants to give 10% over of his tevin, of his not wheat, tevin is straw, right? Or the melach, straw, or the melach, how does he do it? Well, that's a funny question, because the truth is tevin, which is straw, and salt, it doesn't require 10%. It's what's called patu from the 10%. You don't have to give 10% of your melach. Why? Because melach, salt, and straw is not food. And therefore, since it's not food, you don't have to give 10%. It only applies to food or money items. Therefore, when Esav came along to ask his father, Abba, how do you take off 10% from your salt? How do you take off 10% from your straw? Yitzhak understood from there. He said, this must be a very, very good question, because look at my son. He's so religious that he's even asking how to take off ma'aseh, 10% from things you don't even need. Therefore, Yitzhak thought at this point that his son is very religious. Says Rashi, Kasavur Aviv Shehu Midakdek b'mitzvot. His father thought that he's being so nigdakdek in mitzvot, he's being so careful with the mitzvot. And again, my question is, how did he fool Yitzhak? We have to understand who Yitzhak was. Yitzhak was, forget about being one of the patriarchs, but he was also a prophet. He was a Navi. You can't fool the Navi. It's impossible. The Navi knows everything about you. Therefore, if the Navi knows everything about you, how did Yitzhak fall for something that's so simple that he came along and he said, my son must be a very religious man. At the end of the day, he's a prophet, he knows everything. Even, listen, put it this way, even the rabbis of our generation, Forget about the rabbis of 500, 200, 500, 1,000 years ago. They could see right through you. They look, you go walk inside the office, and they say everything written on your forehead. So you're telling me that Yitzchak Avinu didn't know who Esav really was, that you came along, you tell me that he was strict. I saw a fascinating story. There was a rabbi called Rabbi Chaim Pinto. You know, all the Pinto rabbis today. So this is like the great-great-great-grandfather. He was born in Morocco, in Mogador, in I think the year 1745. We're talking about a good, solid, over 200 years ago. They told a fascinating story about him. That one time there was a man that was walking around in one of the Jewish villages in Morocco. Nobody knew who he was, but you could tell he was Jewish. He had tzitzit on, but he was dressed in rags and he looked very, very depressed. And the students of Rabbi Chaim Pinto, they saw this man, and they came back to the rabbi and they told him, so we saw this man, we don't really recognize him, but we saw this new poor Jew that lives in town. Rabbi Chaim told him, he goes, do me a favor, invite him to my house for Leil HaSeder. What's Leil HaSeder? The night of Pesach, invite him to my house. Rabbi Chaim Pinto, he had a custom that he used to host all the poor Jews inside the village of Morocco, in Mogador, by his house. And that was the custom. You went, his students went, they brought all the poor people. It was considered a very happy time. So Rabbi Chaim Pinto told his students, do me a favor, make sure you invite this guy to my Seder. So the students go, they look for him, they find him sitting under a tree. Again, very, very, very depressed looking guy. They come up to me and say, listen, the rabbi would like to invite you to his house for Leil HaSeder. The guy says, listen, do me a favor, I want to be left alone. And no matter how much they tried to convince him, he didn't want to come. They come back to Rabbi Chaim Pinto, they tell him, listen, the guy doesn't want to come. Rabbi Chaim tells him, he goes, come here. He whispers a word in one of the students' ears. He goes, tell that guy this word that I just told you, you're going to see that he changes. All of a sudden, the guy, he goes, the students come, they find him again sitting under the same tree. They come to him, they tell him, listen, Rabbi Chaim really wants you there. And if you don't want to come with us, he goes over to him, he whispers something in his ear. All of a sudden, the guy's eyes opens up. He goes, come, show me your rabbi. He gets up, he goes to the rabbi's house, and the rabbi sees him, and he says, Rabbi, how did you know the name of the ship that took me here that sank, and I lost all my parnasah? Rabbi Chaim told him, he goes, in due time, everything is going to come into light. So all of a sudden, he begins Leil HaSeder, and everybody's around the table, and everybody's happy, but this guy, he's depressed. And Rabbi Chaim looks at all the old people, the poor people, he says, we have a new guest with us, this man. And he says, why don't you get up, why don't you tell your story? So the man gets up, and he explains that originally he's from Morocco, but when he came of age, he wanted to start making business, so he moved to Spain. And in Spain, he started a company, and the company did very well. And he made a lot of money. And eventually he said to himself, it's time to return to my home country. It's time for me to get married. So what did he do? He took all his money and he bought jewelry with it. With the jewelry, he put it inside a suitcase, an attaché case. Back in the day, they didn't have ways to transfer your money. They didn't have cryptocurrency. They didn't have Zelle. They didn't have any of these things. So what do you do with your money when you have too much? You have too much liquid. So you buy something expensive and in hopes to sell it where you're from. So he takes all the jewelry, he puts inside his attaché case, and not only that, he said, but I became very friendly with a certain widow lady. And the widow lady told me that she has a daughter that lives in Morocco, and she wanted to give the daughter the inheritance that her late husband left. Again, it was also jewelry. So she gave me a lot of jewelry, and I put all the jewelry in my suitcase. And with this suitcase, I boarded the ship, and the ship, I sailed to my hometown of Morocco. And he goes, in the middle of the ocean, all of a sudden, the waves were very, very choppy, and our entire ship, it toppled over. And I lost my jewelry case, and I made it away with my life, but barely. With the skin of my teeth, I made it out. And when I got to shore a few weeks later, I was depressed in the fact that I lost my parnasah. My entire life of 10 years of hard work went into the drain by this ocean. But I was even more depressed in the fact that I couldn't deliver to this poor widow's daughter. I couldn't deliver her inheritance. And that's why I'm here. That's why I'm depressed. And everybody, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. Everybody was crying. Rabbi Chaim says, I think I could help you. This is an incredible story. This story was confirmed by his great-grandson, Rabbi David Pinto, who was in this Beit Knesset a few months ago. He's from Ashdod. He confirmed the story. He came along and he said, Rabbi Chaim Pinto takes the Kiddush cup of the Beri Geffen. He takes the Kiddush cup of the first cup. He starts to recite Pesukim over the Kiddush cup, and all of a sudden, a bat kol, bat kol is a heavenly voice, comes out and says, yes, Rabbi Chaim, how could I help you? Now, most of the people at this table, they were simple Jews. They had no idea what's going on. They were freaked out the fact that a voice comes out of nowhere and is asking Rabbi Chaim, how could it help? Rabbi Chaim said that this bat kol, this voice, was actually the voice of the angel of the sea. The name of the angel is called Rahab. Rahab, the angel of the sea. He comes over and he said, Rahab, do me a favor. He goes, we have this man over here. He lost his suitcase full of jewels at the sea. Could you help us? All of a sudden, I kid you not, the cup of wine that he was holding, the cup itself, the cylinder itself, began to widen. It began to widen until it was the size of this entire table. And all of a sudden, the wine that's inside the cup turned into what? It turned into the waves of the ocean. It's as if the cup became temporarily the waves of this ocean. Kid you not. And all of a sudden, floating inside this cup, you see floating an attaché case. Oh, you see the waves, you see the signs, or you see the sounds, and all of a sudden you see a case. The man says, Rabbi Haim, that is my suitcase, that is it. He says, grab it. He puts his hand inside the cup of wine, he pulls out the suitcase, he opens it, and all his jewelry is inside. Rabbi Haim says, it's no coincidence that I invited you to this table, because the girl that you're supposed to deliver the money to, she's sitting right there. They went and they got married, and every single Pesach, for the next 50 years, by the Seder, they tell over the story. How Rabbi Haim, not only did he make the shidduch, but he also saved his attaché case. And at the end, when it was over, the cup turned back into a regular cup of wine. So, why am I telling you this, Rabbi? Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this to come along and say, if Rabbi Haim Pinto had the Ruach HaKodesh to summon Rahab, who's the angel of the sea, to give back this man's attaché case, then you tell me Yitzchak Avinu, who's one of the greatest men that ever lived, he didn't know that his son Esav was tricking him. When Esav came along and he asked Abba, how do you take Maaser off Melach? How do you take Maaser off Tevin? He didn't know. You don't think Yitzchak knew that Esav was fooling him? If Rabbi Haim could summon a case of jewelry from the ocean, you didn't think that Yitzchak knew Esav was fooling him. So what is the explanation? What is the explanation? How do you read this pasuk? Ve'ehad Yitzchak et Esav. Yitzchak loved Esav until the fact he wanted to give him all the barachot. But how did you not know that he was a trickster? How did you not know he was a shyster? So Bishutchem, I have 4 answers to this question. I want to present all 4. The first 3 I've been saying in the past, but the 4th one is a blockbuster hidush. I want to say as follows. The first answer is very simple. Very simple. Hatam Sofer. What does Hatam Sofer say? He says that in order for Yitzchak to give over the blessing, now this blessing wasn't just a blessing that me and you give over to our kids on Friday night. This is a blessing that you know is going to come true. This is big blessings. In order to have the power to bless, he had to have tremendous siyata d'shmaya and ruach hakodesh. You need to have the connection with God, direct connection, in order to these brachot to come true. Now, this is a rule in prophecy that a prophet must be happy when he gives over ruach hakodesh. If he has no happiness, the connection with God is lost. There's no antenna. It's not there. That's why, by the way, when Yaakov in next week's parasha, 2 weeks parasha, for 20 years, he had no connection with God. He didn't speak to God for 20 years. And those 20 years, when Yosef was gone, because he thought that his son was murdered, he was depressed. With depression comes what? Comes no Ruach HaKodesh. And therefore, God says, listen, I need Yitzchak to have Ruach HaKodesh. I need him to have this connection with me to give brachot over to Yaakov and to give over the brachot over to Esav. But if he doesn't have the connection, if he's depressed, then forget about it. Then he has no connection. There's no brachot. So therefore, says Hatam Sofer that God on purpose, he hid the fact that Esav was Rasha from Yitzchak, because if Yitzchak knew that Esav was Rasha, it would put him into a depression. He loses his connection. No Ruach HaKodesh, no brachot, no nothing. So therefore, in a intervention that God had to intercede, he came along and said, Yitzchak, even though you're right, nothing could fool the prophet Yitzchak. But at the same time, God hid it for him on purpose, so he loses the connection, so he has the power to give for the brachot. Is that a clear answer from Hatam Sofer? So a person were to ask you on the street, why did Yitzchak love Esav? Doesn't anybody know that he's a trickster? The answer is yes, and God hid it from him, in order not to make Yitzchak depressed, so he has the koach to give over the brachot. That is the answer of Hatam Sofer. I'll tell you the answer to the Ben Ish Chai, Adarat Eliyahu, which is the third source on the page. Comes the Ben Ish Chai and says, Ben Ish Chai, like as follows. Ben Ish Chai is giving us a tremendous yesod, a tremendous secret foundation of what's called kiruv b'chokim. You want to bring somebody closer to Hashem. In order to do that, you have to what's called unconventional love. Unconventional. You have to love the guy just the way who he is. And if you see a person that's off the derech, you see the guy that you know he's doing sin, but the guy is embarrassed to do it in front of you. You know, sometimes when you see the rabbi coming or the religious guy coming, what do? You hide the fact that you're not being religious. You know, for many years when I was studying in Israel, when I was a kid, I used to stay by my uncle's house. He lives in Tel Aviv. And even though my uncle was a religious man, he kept Shabbat, he kept kosher, but his kids and his wife, they weren't. They didn't keep Shabbat, no nothing. So I remember that as a kid, you know, staying in his house, they used to watch TV on Shabbat. Not my uncle, but the kids didn't. And any time they heard me coming down the stairs, since they knew that I was religious and I kept Shabbat, they would shut off the TV. Because they know there's a certain embarrassment that you have in front of a religious guy. You don't want him to see you watching TV on Shabbat, breaking Shabbat. So for my honor, they showed it on television. This has halachic ramification, by the way. Chacham Ben Zion says, how do you know that when a Jew doesn't keep Shabbat, he's considered a goy? Any Jew that you know that doesn't keep Shabbat, forget about it. The guy's a goy. But says that's not Chacham Ben Zion, that's Ravadia. But says Chacham Ben Zion, how do I know that even though he's not keeping Shabbat, how do I know that he still has a halachic status of a Jew when he's afraid to break Shabbat in front of the rabbi? I said this story before with my father-in-law, that if you see a guy smoking cigarettes on Shabbat, but the moment the rabbi passes by, he's going to take the cigarette, he's going to go like this, that guy doesn't have a halachic status of a guy that's mehallel Shabbat. Because why? He's embarrassed. Sometimes when we used to play basketball as kids on Shabbat, when the rabbi used to go to shul, what we used to do? We stopped playing basketball. Why? Because there's a certain embarrassment that you have in front of the rabbi not to do something inappropriate. Therefore, as long as you have the embarrassment of a guy, as long as you see that somebody is embarrassed to do something wrong in front of you, you know that the busha is there, you know that there's still a possibility of saving this guy. Therefore, what happened? Yitzchak, he came along, and Esav is asking his father very strange questions. Abba, how do you take 10% off straw? How do you take 10% off salt? Now, what did Yitzchak hear? He heard that, yes, I know my son is a deadbeat. I know that he's committing adultery. I know he's murdering. I know he's doing a lot of bad things. But if he's coming along, he's asking me this religious questions, he's cloaking the fact that he's not religious. The fact that I see that my son Esav is embarrassed. He's embarrassed to tell me that he's not religious anymore. I know that I still have the ability to bring him back, to bring him closer. I'll make pretend as if I don't know what he's doing. Because as long as he's embarrassed and I pretend that I have no idea what he's doing, in that case, at least I can bring him back. Says the Ben Ish Chai and Aderet Eliyahu, unbelievable. He says, he brings the pasuk Ve'ehav Yitzchak et Esav Kitai Befiv, and he asks our question. The Chaura says the Ben Ish Chai, Yesh Lomar, He'achaya Yitzchak HaTzadik Ohevet Rasha et Esav. How did Yitzchak love Esav? That's the exact question. He says, Yuvam B'siyat Dishmaya. I'll explain to you. Shemin Haderech. This is it. Im Adam Rasha, if a guy is not good guy, the guy's doing sins all day. However, he doesn't want to publicize the fact that he's doing anything wrong in front of you, because he's embarrassed. Your ter tov, says the Ben Ish Chai, it's better that you make pretend as if you don't know. You don't know. Sometimes even if as fathers to our kids, sometimes the kid does something wrong, but he's trying to hide it from that he's doing something wrong. Make pretend you don't know. My kids, my twins, they love candy. Love candy, they're obsessed with candy. They can get their hands on candy, like candy all day. Sometimes when they know that we don't like candy, what do? They take something from school and we'll go in the bathroom. And all of a sudden we'll hear, well, where's Benjamin? Where's Obadiah? We have no idea. What do we hear? We hear the rappers in the bathroom. And they're ripping over the bathroom with the jelly beans and the thing. So what do? I pretend that I don't know. I'll say, Benjamin, Obadiah, where are you? That's it. I'm not going to say more than that. Because I know the fact that they're hiding, what does that mean? What does that tell me? The fact that they're hiding? They're embarrassed. They know that Abba doesn't last, so they don't want me to see. But that means that I have a chance at least to convince them to put down the candy. But if I come, I start screaming at them, you guys, enough with the candy, you're addicts and that. What are they going to do? They're going to start crying, but they're not going to put down the candy. But now that I know that they're eating the candy, I can slowly come up to them and tell them, listen, this is not Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory over here. So says the Ben Ish Chai, make pretend as if you don't know. Make it as if you don't know his reshut at the same time. There's hope. As long as he's sitting in front of you, as long as the guy is in front of you and he knows that his father knows that he's doing something wrong, but his father's not talking to him about it, at least he's not going to do it in front of you. My Rabbi, Rabbi Kellerman, he always used to tell us that his Rabbi, Rabbi Volbe was one of the great rabbis in Yerushalayim. God forbid, Rabbi Volbe's son went off the derech. He did. He happens to be that now, many years later, he came back, but there was a certain point, a big chunk in his life when he was off the derech. Now, that's hard to explain because Rabbi Volbe is one of the Gadolei Hador, one of the big rabbis of the generation. All his kids were religious except this kid. And I remember sitting down with the interview with him. He said, I used to go to my father's house every Shabbat I had to eat something, but I would drive. In the middle of the meal, I would get up to smoke cigarettes. And I would put down my keys. They knew that I was breaking Shabbat. My father never said anything to me. For the 20 years I was breaking Shabbat and coming to his house, my father never brought it up once that I was coming to his house while I was breaking Shabbat. Why? Because he saw that his son was embarrassed. It's not like he was smoking in front of everybody. It's not like that. He would smoke, he would go outside. He'd make sure to park the car far from the house because he didn't want his younger siblings to see. But that is the yisod over here. The yisod is that when you see somebody's embarrassed to do wrong in front of you, that means there is a certain something that's left inside of him, and if you pretend that you don't know, you have a chance to bring it back. Says the Ben Ish Chai, but if you make it known that you know that he's doing bad, that you know what he's doing bad, the embarrassment that he has, and you make it known that you know, it's going to go away. If you start screaming at him, it's going to go away. Therefore, he says it's a tremendous lesson in parenting that sometimes when our kids do something wrong, they're embarrassed in front of you, also make pretend that you don't know. Because if you start yelling, then that embarrassment is going to go away. Then they're not going to be embarrassed to do it in front of you. It's going to be much worse. Therefore, says the Ben Ish Chai, that's what happened with Yitzchak and Esav. When Esav was asking him this question, Abba, how do you take off 10%? Even though you didn't have to, Yitzchak, he felt from there that it must be that he's embarrassed. Therefore, to interpret the pasuk of how did Yitzchak love Esav, the answer is, he wasn't really loving him be'emet. That's the answer. If you could read the last line of the Ben Ish Chai, I want you to see the last line. He says over here, in the very last line, he says, don't think don't think this was the real inner love that a parent has for a child. Hear that? He loved him. What does lefi sha'ah mean? Temporary. He temporarily loved him because he thought he'd be able to bring Esav back to Teshuvah. That is the answer to Ben Ish Chai. Beautiful, beautiful. So far we have two answers. Hatam sofer, not to make Yitzchak depressed. Hashem hit it. Ben Ish Chai, he knew about it, but he believed that he didn't in hopes to bring Esav back to Teshuvah. Okay, fine. That is the two simple answers to the third answer. Third answer is mamash incredible. Mamash incredible. Buckle your seatbelts. Kitzai befiv. What does it mean that Esav knew how to trap? Says the Arizal something incredible. The truth is, says the Arizal, what does it mean Kitzai befiv? That he knew how to trap? Says the Arizal, there were certain souls. You want to get into souls a little bit? There's certain souls that were trapped in the body of Esav. And these souls were very, very high neshamot. In fact, they tell us that he had 4 souls trapped, where? Specifically in his mouth, in his head area. And those 4 people that were trapped were Shemaiah, Avtalion, Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Akiva. These were 4 of the greatest rabbis in the times of the Talmud, that their souls were trapped inside the head of Esav. How do I know? Because Shemaiah, Avtalion, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Meir, they all descended from converts. They were not actually Jewish. I mean, they're from Esav. They're from Zera Esav. So, says the Arizal that these holy neshamot were trapped inside the body of Esav. And therefore, says the Arizal, that's how we could explain why Yitzchak loved Esav. He didn't love Esav. He loved the neshamot that were trapped inside of him. Says the Arizal as follows in the next source. Rabbeinu Arizal Likutei Torah. He says, you want to know the depth of it? You want to know the inside? You want to know the inside scoop? Our question: how did he love Esav not knowing that he was the Rasha? Says Rabbeinu Ari, Ki befiv shel Esav hayum gonzot neshama Yisrael, because the highest form of Jews were hidden inside the mouth of Esav. Shemaiah, Avtalion, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Akiva, Shehayu b'nei gerim, they were the children of converts. V'yatzu mizaro shel Esav, they came up from Esav. And that's why it says, V'yahav Yitzchak Esav ki tzai befiv, because he knew how to trap. Who was he trapping? Not the game, he didn't know how to trap. He knew how to trap deer and zebra and whatever, but that's a simple explanation. He really knew how to trap. Who was he trapping? He was trapping these 4 holy souls that were inside his mouth. By the way, I could explain. Anybody know the 7 people buried Marat Machpelah? 7 people. Adam, Hava, Abraham, Sarah, Yitzhak, Rivka, Yaakov, and Leah. That's 8 already, so let's count one more time for the camera. Adam, Hava.
Maybe Hava was a better there.
Abraham, Sarah, Yitzhak, Rivka, Yaakov. There's more than that. Esav's head. So the question is, why only Esav's head? Why not Esav's body?
The 4 neshamot he had in his head.
That's the answer. It says that the reason why only Esav's head was buried inside Marat Machpelah is because his head, it held these holy neshamot. So says the Arizal, which is unbelievable. He comes along and he says, so these questions that Esav was asking his father, how do you take off 10% off soul? How do you take off 10% off Tevin? those were very specific questions. They weren't just a question that he made up. Says a rabbi called Me'or Einayim that he asked those questions on purpose because these questions, and also what that Arizal says, that out of all the voices, out of all the neshamot that were inside Esav's body, he specifically heard that of Rabbi Akiva. I want to read you his words inside. He says, "Ki masha katuv tzayid b'fiv," what it says that he had trapped in his mouth. Rotzol Omar, what does that mean? Tzayid or tzad hanishamot hagedoshot shayu milbushim b'fiv. They were trapped inside his mouth. Hayu medabrim mimenu. They were talking. It wasn't Esav talking. When Yitzhak heard the question, how do you take off 10% off salt? How do you take off 10% off straw, of Tevin? He wasn't hearing Esav talking. We were hearing Esav talking. He was hearing Rabbi Akiva talking. Says the Rabbeinu Ari, at the time that he was talking with Yitzhak, reading the Neshamot were talking. Especially especially the Neshama Rabbi Akiva. How do we explain? What is the connection between Rabbi Akiva and this question of Tevin and salt? I'll tell you something unbelievable. There are two episodes in Gemara that tell us that Rabbi Akiva had some sort of interaction with Tevin, with wheat, with straw, or with salt. I'll tell you the Masim, or 9 brings it down. He says that one time, as we know, Rabbi Akiva, who did he marry? Anybody know who Rabbi Akiva married? Rachel. Her name was Rachel, and she was the daughter of a very wealthy man, Kalba Savua. She was Bat Kalba Savua, right? That was his name, Kalba Savua. Very, very wealthy man. And Kalba Savua could have had any domot he wanted, any son-in-law he wanted, he could have had, because at the end of the day, he would support anybody that marries his daughter. So he would assume that his daughter would marry the biggest Talmid Chacham of the town. That's what we wanted for his daughter. His daughter was very religious. I want my daughter to marry the biggest rabbi. But what happened? We know that didn't happen. Instead, she fell in love with Akiva. He wasn't Rabbi Akiva, he was Akiva ben Yosef. And he was Amaretz. We know that he didn't know the Aleph Bet. He knew nothing at the time. So what happened? She says, I want to marry Rabbi Akiva. I want to marry Akiva ben Yosef. And her father told her, if you marry Akiva, that's it. I'm kicking you out of my will. No money, no dowry, no nothing. She said, you know what? I see something in this man. I want to marry him. So what happened? She gets married to him. And they're living a life of poverty. They had nothing. They were so bad that they were living in a 1-bedroom apartment, and all of a sudden, they had no beds to sleep on. All they had was some straw to sleep on. And all of a sudden, she became depressed, because the bottom line is, you could believe in a lot of things. You could believe in your husband will become the greatest rabbi, but at the end of the day, until it doesn't actually happen, you begin to have second thoughts. And this Rachel, she came from a very wealthy family. She was used to maids, and she was used to plush mattresses and silk pajamas. She was used to the 9 yards. But all of a sudden now she's there. She can't even take a shower, and she's sleeping on tevin. She's sleeping on straw. And she saw, and Rabbi Akiva saw that she started to get depressed. So what happened? He prayed to Hashem. He goes, Hashem, how could I calm my wife down? How can I make her happy temporarily? So what happens? All of a sudden there's a knock on the door. Hashem answered his prayer, and a guy is by the door, and he says, listen, do me a favor. I'm staying in the next house, and my wife, she's in the middle of giving birth. And we don't even have straw to lay her down on. She gives birth like a normal person. So Rabbi Akiva looks at his wife. He says, look, Rahel, we don't have such a bad life. At the end of the day, this woman's giving birth. She can't even lay down on nothing. At least we have straw. And all of a sudden, what does Rabbi Akiva do? He takes a little bit of his straw, and he gives maybe 10% of that straw, and he gives it over to this person. Oh, it says in Me'or Einayim. Oh, so that makes sense. All of a sudden, when Yitzhak is hearing the question, hey, how do you take 10% off the tevin? What he's really hearing is the voice of Rabbi Akiva, who knows one day he's going to give 10% of his tevin, of his straw, and give it over to this random person. By the way, the rabbis tell that random person wasn't so random. It was Eliyahu Hanavi, who came to kind of, appease Rachel at this situation. So you see, there's a big connection between He'ach Ma'aserin et Tevin to Rabbi Akiva. The next episode in the Torah was when he had the salt. What was the salt episode? So the Gemara is discussing the case over there in Yoma. Anytime there is Tisha B'Av Shechaliyot Erev Shabbat, can't happen nowadays. When you have Tisha B'Av that falls out on Friday, but it happened back in the day. Tisha B'Av that fell out on Friday. So the Gemara over there is having a machloket, having an argument. Do you finish the fast? Do you go into Shabbat fasting? Or do you break the fast right before Shabbat? Machloket over there. So Rabbi Akiva, he came along, he said, you don't go into Shabbat fasting. That's not inappropriate. Therefore, right before Shabbat, you're supposed to eat something. And in order to show his students what the correct halacha was, the Gemara tells us that right before Shabbat started, Rabbi Akiva took an egg and he swallowed it whole. However, the Gemara says, but he didn't put any salt on it. Why didn't he put any salt on it? Because he wanted to show the students, even though this is permissible, you don't want to enjoy the egg. You don't want to enjoy it. You want to say, just because of halakha, I'll break my fast, but I don't want to enjoy it. Therefore, the salt is there to enjoy the egg. But right now, I'm not putting any salt. Just like Rabbi Akiva separated himself from the salt, so too when he came along and he asked, Yitzchak Avinu heard, oh, this must be Rabbi Akiva talking. Unbelievable. He says, I want to read you the words inside me. Look what he says. This is what our rabbis tell us. Al pasuk yitzayid b'fiv. He trapped him with his mouth. Shaya shoel Abba he'ach me'asirin et hatevin v'et hamelach noda. Rabbi Akiva nasa betchilat bat kalba savua. Because Rabbi Akiva, he married the daughter of Kalba savua. V'yidiro mimenu hana'an. He said, if you marry this man, you're out of my will. I'm not giving you a dime. They would lie down on straw. And came Eliyahu Hanavi. He appeared like a very poor man. He asked, please, my wife is giving birth. I don't have any straw for her to lie down on. And Rabbi Akiva, he gave over his portion of the tevin. This is a very good midah, a very good character trait. And all this Yitzchak Avinu, he felt. He knew exactly when the question he was asking. He saw this episode in Gemara. He knew that it wasn't Esav talking. It was Rabbi Akiva talking. This is the remez. This is the hint on Rabbi Akiva. What happened with the salt? It was Shabbat that fell on Friday. He took an egg and he ate it. Not to go into Shabbat when he's fasting. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yehuda. One time we were sitting in front of Rabbi Akiva, and it was Tisha B'Av that fell out on a Friday. And he took the beitzah, he swallowed it without any salt. Not because he was hungry. To show the students halakha, they're not supposed to go inside Shabbat fasting. So unbelievable. We have a third answer to our question. Our question was, how could Yitzchak love Esav? What's the answer? He didn't really love Esav. Who did he love instead? He loved Rabbi Akiva. That was inside of him. Unbelievable answer. Okay, B'Shutchem, this is the answer that came to say. By the way, all those answers I gave last year. B'Shutchem, this is the answer that I found this year. This is incredible. You have to know something. Know something as follows. To the Satan, Yitzchak is very important. Why is he very important? Because Yitzchak Avinu is going to be responsible for Mashiach coming in our times. He is the reason why the Geulah is going to come. How do I know? Oh, very good. Gemara Shabbat Daf Peitet, one of the sources. What happens? The Gemara is going to say that Latid Lavo, in the future, God is going to be fed up with the Jewish people. He said, I can't take it anymore. They're doing too many sins. This is right before Mashiach is going to come. And what happens? He's going to come to Abraham. He's going to come to Yaakov. And he's going to tell them, Banecha chatu, that your children, they have sinned against me. So what is Abraham and Yaakov going to answer? What are they going to say? If that's true, Hashem, that the children are sinning, Yemachu al Kiddushat Shemecha. What does that mean? Erase them. If they're bemet sinning, you can't do anything about it. Just erase them completely and get rid of them. Yitzchak Avinu is not going to say that. Yitzchak Avinu is going to come along and say, no, Hashem, listen, let's make heshbon. What's heshbon? Let's make an accounting. Let's figure it out. How long does a person live? How many years does a person live? 70 years. David HaMelech says, 70 years. But the truth is, the God doesn't start counting sins until you're 20 years old. So it's really 70 minus 20, because you don't start counting sins until you're 20. So really it's 50 years. So 50 years a person is sinning. Yeah? 50 years a person is sinning. How many years of the 50 does a person sleep? Let's say half. So out of the 50 years that a person is sinning, really 25 of it, he's sleeping. So he's not sinning while he's sleeping, therefore take off 25 years. So how many years we have left? 25 years. Out of those 25 years, how many years is spent eating, drinking, or going to the bathroom? Another half. So let's say out of 25 years that a guy is really sinning, he's not sinning while he's eating, he's not sinning while he's drinking, he's not sinning while he's in the bathroom. So therefore, take off another half of 25, so you have 12 and a half years left. Says Yitzchak Avinu, listen, 12 and a half years of sin, not so bad. That's not so bad. Listen, God, if you can't take all 12 and a half years, then me and you are going to split it. 6 years on me, 6 years on you, that's fine. If you don't want to do that, I'll take all 12 and a half on me. So it's because Yitzchak Avinu, he comes along and because he convinces God through this argument that really the Jewish people are worthy to have, because of that argument of Yitzchak Avinu, we're going to bring Mashiach. So good. So it's because of Yitzchak that one day we're going to be saved. Is that clear? Because of Yitzchak we have Mashiach. Now the Satan knows this. The Satan knows that the key to our Geulah, that's why it says that we have nobody to rely on, Ela Avinu Sheba Shamayim. Who's Avinu Sheba Shamayim? Not Hashem, Yitzhak Avinu. Because it's going to be Yitzhak Avinu that's going to save us one day. So all of a sudden, Satan knows this. Satan knows that what? The Yitzhak is going to be responsible for our Geulah. Therefore, the Satan's goal is, whatever has to do with Geulah, with Mashiach and all that stuff, I have to stop it. Why does Satan care about Mashiach? Because the moment Mashiach comes, what's going to happen to him? No longer he ceases to exist. Therefore, in order to continue living, he has to make sure Mashiach doesn't come. So what does the Satan do? The Satan has to make sure that Yitzhak doesn't make it out alive. He has to make sure that whatever happens with Yitzhak, I need to kill that guy. Because as long as that guy is not around, it's kind of like, sometimes you have the mafia. You have a guy who sees the murder. So he's like the key witness in the entire thing. As long as the key witness testifies, the entire mafia is going to jail. So what do they do to that key witness? All of a sudden the guy's brakes doesn't work. The guy's driving and all of a sudden he's going 50 miles on the highway. Brakes doesn't work. He crashes and he dies. Freak accident, he dies. Why do they want to take him out? Because as long as that guy testifies, they're all going to jail. He doesn't testify, they don't go to jail. Same thing over here. Yitzhak is the key witness. Satan is the mafia. As long as Yitzhak testifies, as long as Yitzhak is living, Satan has no more life. So what happens? So Satan has to do everything in his power to make sure Yitzhak is killed. So therefore, when Abraham is about to bring him on the Akedah and slaughter him, who's praying that he gets slaughtered? Who's praying? Satan is praying to get slaughtered. Because if he dies, that's it. For him, it's much better. It's much better. That's why, by the way, it says, by the Akedah, pay attention to the next time you read it. It says that when Abraham was about to switch Yitzhak out with the ram, what did it say on the ram? What was the ram? It says that he was tied up, that he was tied up, he was tangled with his horns inside the tree. Why was he tangled? Because the Satan was trying to stop the ram from being brought as a hachlafa, as a switcheroo to Yitzhak. Therefore he said, I gotta stop this happening. I want Yitzhak to get slaughtered. Now watch, this is amazing, this is unbelievable. He comes along and he says, anything that Satan can do to stop Mashiach, he's going to do. You know what I wasn't planning on saying this. I saw a story with Rabbi Haim ben Attar. This story is brought down by the Haidah. The Haidah was one of the students of Rabbi Haim ben Attar. This is Orach HaMekadosh. He says, unbelievable. He says that one time, it was the year 1742, long time ago, 1742, and it was Hoshana Rabbah. Hoshana Rabbah, holy night. The Haidah is saying on his master, the Orach HaMekadosh, that night was very holy. He comes along in shul, he's dressed like an angel, all in white. He says a tikkun, Hoshana Rabbah night, and his face was glowing. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, he goes inside his room, he changes his clothes from white to black, and the entire night, he's on his face crying in his office. Crying. And all of a sudden, right before daybreak, he puts back his white clothing on, he goes, he prays nets. The moment nets is over, changes back into his office, changes back in black, and the entire time he's crying. Says the Haidah, it was Shmini Atzeret. It was a day later when I had the chutzpah to come up to my rabbi and to ask him, Rabbi, what's going on? Why are you crying? I went up to him and I asked him, he said, you should know. When I was reading the Tikkun Hoshana Rabbah, he says, I had an opportunity to ask the angels and God for whatever I wanted. And I told God at that moment, I said, bring Mashiach. Bring Mashiach. I said, you know what? They told me yes. They told me I could have him. And the moment they told me yes, and the Satan heard that God gave the okay for Mashiach to come, it said at that moment he brought a tremendous kitruk, a tremendous persecution of the Jewish people, and he made a lot of people sin at that moment. So Hashem had to resend his request for Mashiach, and in order to stop, now it was so bad, Satan made so many people sin at that time that Hashem said, forget about Mashiach, I have to kill everybody now. Orach HaMekadosh said that in order to stop Hashem's anger from wiping out the Jewish people, I had to give Hashem my own soul. I had to tell Hashem, take me instead. That year, says the Haidah, in 1742, Orach HaMekadosh died. Because he gave his own soul as a korban, as a sacrifice, so Hashem wouldn't wipe out the Jewish people. So you see a proof that when Mashiach is about to come, Satan has to stop because he knows that's going to be his last legs. So all of a sudden we have a story that Satan knows Yitzhak is the key. So he must kill Yitzhak. But it didn't work. And now Yitzhak survived. Now what is the Satan doing? Satan is doing everything he can to what's called mikatrek. He's prosecuting. He's telling Hashem, they're no good. He's like a fly in Hashem's ear, like a mosquito. Get away from me. So what does Hashem have to do? Sometimes when you have that mosquito buzzing around you, what do? You put something sweet over there, so he goes to do something sweet. You throw him a bone. That's what it's called. Hashem had to throw a bone to the Satan. Listen to what happened, Rabbi. Listen to what happened. This is incredible. Listen to what happened. Hashem has to throw a bone over to the Satan. He has to pacify him. So what does he tell Satan? Go, Satan, in order to keep you quiet, so you stop saying bad things about the Jewish people, I'm going to allow you to have a chelek, to have a portion in the firstborn of Yitzchak. Whoever the firstborn of Yitzchak is, the Bechor of Yitzchak, I'll let you have a chelek bo. You get full control of him. Now we know why Esav was such a Rasha, because that's the Bechor of Yitzchak. So listen to what happened. Listen to what happened. Listen to what happened. Hold on. I thought that was going to be where he was going. That's not where he was going. There's a secret. There's a secret instead. Listen to the secret. We think that the firstborn of Yitzchak was Esav. And that's why Satan has a portion in Esav, because Hashem promised him a portion in the Bechor. And that's why Esav is so bad. There was really supposed to be somebody else. It was really supposed to be somebody else. Thank you, Isaac Abraham, for whispering that. It's supposed to be somebody else that was supposed to be born instead of Esav. Hence, the title of today's shiur is the real twin of Yaakov Avinu. Turn the page. It says the rabbi called Galia Raza, one of the students of the Rabbeinu Ari. He comes on, he says, blockbuster Hidush, Shanayahu, he says. It was befitting not for Esav to be born as Yaakov Avinu's twin. Says Galia Raza, that the truth is that Hashem has a kisei kavod. He has not a kisei, but he has a chariot. He has a holy chariot. And the chariot has 4 wheels or 4 legs. And each of those 4 wheels is Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. Who's the 4th wheel? David HaMelech. And therefore it says Galia Raza that the truth is the person that was supposed to be born along with Yaakov wasn't Esav. It was King David. King David was supposed to be the other twin, or the older twin of Esav. Comes along and he says, Shayara Ui, it was befitting. Ki yachad im leidat Yaakov, together with the birth of Yaakov, Shayara Gil Shlishit, he was the 3rd wheel of the Merkava, the chariot. Yivaled Gam David HaMelech. The King David was supposed to be born, Haregel HaRevi'it, the fourth of the wheels of the chariot. Ella, what happened? What happened? Things changed. Because the Satan was driving Hashem crazy, persecute, God had to, so to speak, switch out. He had to switch out. He pulled a double sketch on the Satan. Instead of having David HaMelech to be born with Yaakov and giving the Satan control over David HaMelech, he gave him some other guy. Esav. He took control of Esav instead. Now Satan had no idea. The Satan is thinking the whole time, who does he have control over? He thinks Esav is David HaMelech. You hear this? He thinks Esav is David HaMelech. That's why, can I have a sheet for 1 second? I thought there being a proof to this concept because I didn't put this on my sheet. But the rabbi called Amudei Shiv'ah. Look at the second to last source. He says in Bereshit Rabbah, which is the Midrash in this week's parasha, he says that David HaMelech looked a lot like Esav. They both had very, very hairy, red hair. Says Amudei Sheva, Katuv Beseder Parshatenu. He saw David was very red. He got scared. He said, he was red. He got scared, Shmuel Hanavi. Wow, this guy is so red, he's going to kill people like Esav. And says the Hashem, he said, no, calm down. Esav midat atzmu horeg. No, Esav is killing because he wants to. David HaMelech midat Sanhedrin horeg. He's killing because Sanhedrin gave him the okay, because the courts gave him the okay. He's killing because in order to conquer quest for Am Yisrael. So you see David HaMelech, and I'm thinking to myself, how could Shmuel and Avi make a mistake between David and Esav? The answer is, because that's what was supposed to happen. It was supposed to happen where Esav was switched with David HaMelech, or the opposite, David was switched with Esav. So hold on a second, I want to continue reading for a second, because we have to understand something. The Zohar says, listen to the Zohar. The Zohar says that if Yitzhak Avinu was going to be the reason why Mashiach is going to come, and Yaakov Avinu is Keneged, the 3rd Beit HaMikdash, Abraham is first Beit HaMikdash, Yitzhak is 2nd Beit HaMikdash, Yaakov is Keneged, the 3rd Beit HaMikdash. And who's going to be Melech HaMashiach? According to the Zohar, it's going to be King David. King David is going to be the Melech HaMashiach, he's going to be Messiah. So therefore, if you have these 3 people in the world at the same time, you have Yitzhak, responsible for our defense attorney, Yaakov, Keneged Beit HaMikdash Lishi, and David HaMelech, Keneged King David, King Mashiach. Said the Satan, I'm in big trouble. If these guys are around, I have no chance of prosecuting the Jewish people. So he has to somehow get David HaMelech. So now that he has chelik in what he thinks is David, he thinks he has everything under control. He thinks that Mashiach is never going to come because he has chelik in David. But Hashem pulled the switch through. Hashem said, I'm not giving you David. I'm giving you Esav instead. And now everything makes sense. Now the Satan thinks the whole time, I have David. And all of a sudden, when Yitzchak blesses Yaakov instead, that's when he realizes, I must not have David. Because if it was David, the brachot would have gone to him instead. And I have chelik in that. It must be that this guy is not really David HaMelech. Not to answer our original question. Why does Yitzchak love Esav so much? Why does he love him? Because he also has no idea. He knows that Hashem has to give him two tzaddikim as twins. He thinks his two twins are King David, Yaakov Avinu. That's why he loves Esav so much, because he had no idea it was really Esav. Only once after he realized he gave the barakah to the wrong guy, he said to himself, this guy must not be King David. What a huge chidush Rabotai. No one is falling off their chairs. When I saw this, I was dancing for joy. I want to read you his words inside. He says unbelievable. He says, this big persecution came on Yitzchak. He wanted to stop him from getting born. But he was born. That's why he tried to tie up the idol's horns inside the tree, so in order not to put him in place. Yitzchak, his midah is the fear of Yitzchak. He is the biggest of the judgments. And all the evil forces, they're very scared of Yitzchak. Rosh kol hadinim hakidushim shekol roshei klipot nichnaim tachtav. All the evil forces, they're subjugated to Yitzchak. Lo ratzah hasatan shehu v'chol chayotav yehu mishubadim tachtav. They didn't want to be subjugated by Yitzchak. Lachen kedei litgaber al hakitrug shel satan. In order to pacify the Satan, hiftichulo. This is the key. The Satan was guaranteed by God. Shehaya lo chelek v'nechala b'zerah habichor sheyitzchak. He was guaranteed you're going to have a portion in the firstborn of Yitzchak. Asher kefi hamevuad. What it was supposed to be, what? Min hashamayim leirulei David hamelech. It was supposed to be King David. Aval lemaaseh. Listen to this key line. Lemaaseh. Rimu oto. God, he tricked the Satan. Min hashamayim shenolad Esav arasha b'mkom David hamelech. Esav was born instead of King David. V'asatan chashav kol zman. The Satan was thinking the whole time al Esav shu David. He thought that Esav was David. Look at that, unbelievable. V'samach meod. He was very happy. Shu sholet alav, that he's controlling him. Adit galalo shehu Esav. At the end, he was found out that it wasn't Esav. It was Esav. It wasn't David. Oh, now says the Rabbi, now we can be very happy. We can answer our question. He asked this question, why did Yitzchak want to bless Esav and not Yaakov? Basically, he's asking our question, why did he love Esav and not Yaakov? Says the Rabbi, he knew. He said the Dalit David. He knew that David HaMelech had to come from him. Yachad im Yaakov, with Jacob together. He had no idea that Hashem tricked him. He had no idea that Hashem switched out David with Esav. He thought that Esav was David. He wanted to give Esav all the brachot because he thought Esav was David. So he thought, listen, if I have to bring Mashiach, and I have all the ingredients, I have myself, I have my other son Yaakov, which is Keneged Beit HaMikdash. Now I have David HaMelech, who's going to bring Melech Mashiach. Let me give him all the brachot. Well, he realized eventually it's really Esav. That's why he didn't give him the brachot. Unbelievable, Rabbi. Unbelievable. So now it turns out that we have 4 answers to our question. With this, I'm going to end. Let's just review the 4 answers. Answer number 1, Hatam Sofer. Why did Yitzchak love Esav even though he was Rasha? Hashem hid it from him. Hashem hid it from him in order to keep him happy, to give him special siyata d'shmaya, Ruach HaKodesh, to give up for the brachot. Hatam Sofer. Ben Ish Chai, he was teaching us a parenting, a kiruv tool. That if you want to make sure to bring somebody back into Shuvah, you want to make sure to really rebuke somebody, make believe you don't know. If you know the guy's hiding it from you, also hide it from him as well. And slowly, you'll be able to convince him in the proper way instead of yelling at him. Because once you yell, he's going to do it in front of you, he's not going to care anymore. Third answer from the Arizal, who was Yitzchak really loving? He was loving Shmaya, Avtalion, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Akiva. And he heard Rabbi Akiva coming out of his mouth because he knew certain hints in his wording. Tells us the Gemara that was talking about him. Finally, who was really Esav? It wasn't supposed to be Esav. It was supposed to be King David, David HaMelech. And with David HaMelech was supposed to bring the final Geulah HaMashiach. But finally, because of the Kitru, because he was bothering Hashem so much, Hashem had to switch it out and say, it's not going to be really David, it's really going to be Esav. What do I learn from you, Rabotai? I learned something incredible. The Torah is so deep. Don't believe those guys that come along and they say, oh, Yitzchak Avinu, he was senile. Give me a break. Yitzchak Avinu, him being blind, he knew more than me and you and everybody alive put together. He knew exactly what he was doing. And therefore, you cannot explain these episodes in the Torah on a very, very superficial, very, very low type of level. Oh, it must be he was blind. He didn't know. He knew just fine. And therefore, if we analyze the Torah with this mindset, the Torah is so much more deeper than we think. And Hashem will bring us and our families. Amen. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.